As of recording this, there are now 68 days left until we have to have the Ferrari finished, so of course, we're gonna work on the Audi.
But hear me out, because I promise this makes at least a little bit of sense. If we're gonna focus on the Ferrari to get it done, I wanna be ready and prepared to dive headfirst into the Audi as soon as the time comes. The goal for today is to remove all 4 struts from the car so that we can package them up and ship them off to Germany, where our friends at H&R can undertake a custom coilover build. I can't say I was surprised that the first thing I encountered was something quintessentially Audi. Black plastic lug nut covers that didn't come with a tool for removal. My solution was just to blast them off with the impact, although I'm sure there was an easier way. I couldn't care less because these are going straight in the trash. Admittedly, I was concerned that this, combined with the fact that in the last episode we had to remove the entire front end of the car to do a leak down test, was a bit of a precursor for how this strut removal job was going to go. As said in the last episode, I've never worked on one of these cars and I have no idea how they go together or come apart. There is nothing about antiquated all-wheel drive McPherson struts on all 4 corners of the car that screams, this is going to be easy to do. But with all 4 wheels and tires off the car, it's time to dive in and find out what this job's really going to entail. Will it meet my expectations of being an absolute nightmare, or will it leave me surprised? Well, I decided to start by dropping the sway bar from the control arms, only to find out that, no, the bolts aren't a 10 like you would expect. I had to go find my 11mm socket for maybe the first time ever. So yeah, go on, take your guesses about how this job's really gonna play out. Now, I will come clean. I did hop on Google and look up how to do this job. Granted, the car is uncommon enough that all I could find was an old text post with very basic instructions, but I wanted to work smarter, not harder. There to aid me in making this job easier was whoever worked on this car before I did. I was warned by someone familiar with this machine that it would need a once-over, that I was bound to find loose hardware here and there, and it turns out the bolts holding all of the brake calipers onto the car weren't even tight. Up next were the tie rod ends, which surprisingly weren't all that tight either. I've shared this ball joint separator before in the past, and I'm sharing it again because, in my opinion, it's the best version of this tool. I got some feedback that some of you have had them snap, but I'm here to say, once again, this thing does the job every single time. Onto the lower ball joint. I struggled to separate the ball joint from the strut itself, so instead I decided to simply unbolt the ball joint from the control arm because it's just held on with 2 bolts. It took a little bit of manipulation in order to get the bolts past the drive axle, but with these removed, it looked like this strut was about to come out of the car. Maybe, just maybe, this was going to be an easier job than anticipated. I moved topside and unbolted the strut from the strut tower itself. With the final turns of the impact, the strut dropped free, and it was clear there was only one nut left to remove, the axle nut. Astoundingly, it didn't put up a fight either, and I expected the axle to be seized in the hub, but nope, it was totally free. With that, the strut came out of the car, and the entire process probably took 15 minutes. That is, of course, if you ignore the 2 hours that it took to film the process, but that's a different discussion. The second strut came out even quicker, only about 6.5 minutes start to finish according to the time code on my video. So, let me say, kudos to Audi because that's the easiest suspension removal I have ever done. It's pretty helpful that the rear suspension is almost identical to the front. The biggest difference is that we've got to remove the rear seat base and the rear seat back from the back of the car. All of that just so that we can move the rear parcel shelf out of the way so that we can get access to the strut hat bolts in the rear. Honestly, it sounds more complicated than it is. All of the stuff comes out without any tools and only took a couple of minutes to get access to. Otherwise, it's pretty much identical to the front. What's really interesting to me is that it's a McPherson strut in the rear. I'm not sure I've ever seen that before. But it did get me thinking. It would be remarkably easy to add 4-wheel steering to this car. Now, apologies for the background noise, there's some construction going on, but we've got the struts off of the car,
The only snag is, in order to disassemble these, you need a special tool in order to remove the strut hat from the shock itself, which is completely insane to me. Why it's not just a nut like a normal shock is beyond me, but we're either gonna have to make it or buy it. We'll do that later. But otherwise, let's move forward on getting these bearings pressed out. We'll get the brake shields taken off and get them otherwise prepped to send out to Germany. So let's get that done.
So I removed the brake line mounts and the brake dust shields, and then turned my attention to those lower ball joints I mentioned before. I struggled to remove them while they were on the car because I didn't realize that the bolt actually holds them in. Just like the lower ball joints on my Model A, the taper has a keyway for the bolt to keep it from coming out if the bolt's in place, but I've never seen this on a German car in the past. Doesn't mean there aren't plenty with it, but it's a first time for me, and it's definitely not something BMW utilizes. Now over to the arbor press. My buddy Justin suggested that I buy this seal driver or bearing driver set from Amazon, and I'm putting a link in the description because it's one of the best tool suggestions I've gotten in a long time. This set of steel drivers comes in every size from something like 18mm to 74, and that means I'm never going to have to hunt for just the right size cylindrical object to use in the press ever again. Pressing the hub out of the wheel bearings gives us access to the pair of snap rings that are both on the front of this thing and the back. By removing these snap rings, it'll give us the ability to press the wheel bearings out, and at this point, I'm just hopeful that I can get replacements. I keep hearing how hard parts are to find for these cars, and maybe I'm being a bit naive or just too optimistic about what I'm going to be able to find. Coming from the world of vintage BMWs, pretty much every single critical part is still made in some capacity. But I've heard some horror stories that some really essential stuff for these Quattros is absolutely not available. So I guess I'm going to find out the hard way, one way or another. The bearing driver set proved incredibly useful, this time with the 74mm driver, which was the perfect size for these wheel bearings. It was like it was made for this. If you have a press, hydraulic or otherwise, you owe yourself the $55 this tool set costs. So with these things mostly taken apart, let's talk about why we need to send them out to have coilovers made as opposed to just buying something off the shelf. If you look at this thing, it's all one piece. The base of the upright is a cast piece of steel, it's welded to the strut housing itself, and the steering arm is welded to that. Converting this to a coilover is no simple task, and it's certainly not something we could expect a company to carry an off-the-shelf part for, because after all, how many people would be buying these versus how much they'd cost to make? So H&R is going to use these for cores, but I do want to say there is a chance we'll upgrade to the later model uprights. My buddy Dave Pecoraro tells me they use a separate strut housing and knuckle, which would make a coilover conversion significantly easier, and it might help some of our driveline swap woes in the future. So I'm going to see what H&R wants to do and what makes the most sense. But with all of our suspension talk out of the way, there is something else to address, because there's two things I said in the last episode. The first of them is this. Now, looking at the engine that I wound up with, you might assume that it came from the bottom of the ocean, but no, it came from an RS2. But in my defense, I also said this.
I don't really know much about this car. I mean, I can tell you that it looks really cool and I can tell you about its history, but I don't know how it goes together, how it comes apart, or how it really works.
Some of you guys pointed out that the engine that I have is clearly not out of an RS2, and honestly, that's news to me. I'm just parroting what I was told that I bought after I went to a guy that was recommended to me to find Audi parts. What I have is an AAN, but the RS2 came with an engine known as an ADU, and this is not that same motor. They're similar, but definitely different. As you guys saw, the AAN that we have is not the nicest example, and I've since found out that the differential this guy sold me also won't even fit in the car, so we're off to a bit of a bad start, but I guess I kind of need to take the blame for that because I'm an ignorant buyer. I shouldn't place so much faith in the people that are trying to sell me something. The other thing that I said in the last intro was that I'm confident you guys are going to teach me some stuff as this build progresses, and you already have, so thank you for the corrections and helping me understand what exactly I'm working with. I'm a fabricator, not a mechanic, and I'm certainly not an Audi guy. But as with anything, I'm just eager to learn.
So that's all the work I'm gonna get done in this episode. All that I have left is a couple of small notes for you guys. The first one is to say thank you again for all of the support on this build so far. I'm still surprised at how many people are excited and are tuning into these Audi episodes. I am just so stoked to really dive into this build when the time comes. And by getting this suspension stuff sent out now, by the time we are quote unquote done with the Ferrari, we'll be able to get back on the Audi and have parts to install. Fingers crossed. That's the plan at least. I'm trying to keep us from getting held up when it's time to really dive into this thing and make some good progress. And then last but not least, for those that are interested, next week, either Tuesday or Wednesday, the next episode that comes out, I've got a merch drop coming. I've got new t-shirt designs and some new garage banners. I'm really excited about them. They're my favorite ones yet. So subscribe if you haven't. Hit that bell. Make sure you don't miss it. It's probably going to be Wednesday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. So don't miss out. Or if you want to make sure you can get some stuff, all of the Patreon subscribers have already had their chance to buy anything they want so nothing sells out, if you care. But either way, thank you guys for showing support in any fashion that you do. I appreciate it beyond words. I'll catch you guys next week. We'll be back on the Ferrari. We're installing coilovers. It's going to be sick. I'll see you then.